Let's go now to Emily Pagashnik for the weather news. Emily?
Thanks, Morgan. This week in the weather studio, we've been taking a look at some high winds that moved through Des Moines, Iowa. Some bit larger oak trees have been demolished due to these winds, and some debris has been scattered everywhere, and some neighborhoods were left without power. The local power company is currently surveying the damage, and the National Weather Service is also surveying the damage since they're not sure if it happened due to straight line winds or a tornado. Roads were shut down across Wyoming this week over wintry conditions. Black ice earlier in the day caused crashes, and wind gusts up to 70 miles an hour later on in the day led to more crashes. Conditions caused a 50-mile stretch of interstate to be closed, which caused a lot of truckers to get stranded on that stretch of road as well. Most of our severe weather that we see throughout the country is due to a low pressure system. We're going to talk about a Colorado low, which is one particular one. Starts off in Colorado, hence the name Colorado low. It usually has a warm front and a cold front trailing on it, and as it moves, the precipitation that hangs out around the warm front actually wraps around in a counterclockwise position around that low pressure system. And about right here is where it's usually its strongest, and the closer you are to that low pressure system, the higher your winds will be, which is why Iowa saw such high wind gusts earlier this week due to a Colorado low. As it continues on into its lifespan, it weakens a little bit, forming an occluded front, and that's where the cold front overtakes the warm front, making that warm air detach from the low pressure system at the surface of the earth. Now, trees, they are great for shelter and some shade, but not some of the larger clusters are disappearing along the North Dakota prairie. While driving along the highway in North Dakota, you will start to see a pattern. That pattern consists of trees that stretch across farm fields in a straight line. Farmers planted these tree rows decades ago, and they are dying.
The farmstead shelter belts and windbreaks being removed. In many cases, they're not being replaced.
The shelter belt program was started in the 1930s. The tree rows were originally planted to slow the harsh North Dakota winds and save topsoil. Many farmers say they don't need the trees to help with wind erosion, but there are incentives to keep them standing.
There are some programs available where you can actually get financial compensation for replanting trees and for renovating, maybe through some pruning or fertilizing or spacing of existing shelter belt trees.
Saugasser and his team suggest staying away from ash trees because of their susceptibility to disease. He suggests other, more hardy species.
Some of those are oaks, for example, hackberry, different varieties of linden, or what we call basswood.
Saugasser also says wildlife depend on the trees for shelter. While new life may thrive with the added habitat, farming practices often dictates the prairie landscape. Another reason for the disappearance of the tree rows is due to the larger farm equipment we have nowadays. Farmers, they have a harder time maneuvering around those trees. And that brings us to our weather question of the week. What is the record for the most snowfall in one day in the United States? Is it 43 inches, 57, 68, or 76 inches? Now, Morgan, this event also holds the record for most continuous snowfall due to one storm.
All right, thanks, Emily. Thanks, Kari. Now, Emily joins us in the studio with a final look at the weather. Emily?
Thanks, Morgan. As we take a look at our temperatures for the next week, most of the country will be warm with a little bit chillier conditions off into the western part of the United States, mainly around the mountains. Most of the country will also see some precipitation next week, and California will be out of that rut of drier than average precipitation for the next week. And that brings us back to our weather question of the week. What is the record for most snowfall in one day in the United States? That is actually 76 inches. This happened between April 14th and 15th in 1921 in Silver Lake, Colorado. And the storm lasted a little over 32 hours. And Morgan, in that 32-hour time frame, it dropped about 95 inches of snow.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.